All right, well, it's time to get started. Certainly I would have preferred to go over this with you all in person. It's a little weird talking to the computer, but we will get through this. One note, I do have 2 dogs and a cat, and I'm working from home, so you might hear them in the background a little bit. I apologize for that. Hopefully you just find it cute. Anyway, my plan for this particular video is to cover the objectives of what we will be going over. Prior to really getting to the cognition stuff, I want to do a little bit of a review from last week, cover a little bit of research methods, and then we'll get into problem solving, particularly the challenges that people often face when we're solving problems. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about heuristics. And heuristics are simply quick and simple strategies that we use to solve problems that usually work but not always. And then in later videos we will go over the rest of these objectives right here. Okay, let me go ahead and move on. Now here I will get into the review of research methods. So had we been in person, this would have been a clicker question for you. So I do want you to give a little bit of thought before I go into the answers. So you can read this here, and as you're reading and trying to decide if it's an experiment or a correlation, I want you to pay attention to this sticky note that I made for you right here. The first thing that you should do when you look at a problem like this is to identify the variables, the main variables. So the first sentence says, Dr. Jeffries examined the relationship of stress and immune function. So right here we see that the main variables would be stress and immune function. Now of course we need to figure out, okay, how would we operationalize these variables? Remember, operationally defining something means to come up with a way of quantifying it, a way of measuring it. So how is stress measured? Well, Dr. Jeffries created a questionnaire to assess it. And then in order to actually operationally define immune function, the way she did that was with a white blood cell count. So our variables would be the results from this stress test and the white blood cell count. Now once you do that, you need to determine if the researcher actively changed either of the variables. So we look back here. Did Dr. Jeffries actively change the stress in her participants' lives? No, that wasn't happening here. Was she actively changing their white blood cell count? Well, no, she wasn't injecting anything into them. She wasn't irradiating them at all. She didn't make a change at all. Did she create groups or conditions? No. Did she assign participants to groups or conditions? No. So, since our answer is no to that question above, the researcher just recorded information, and therefore it is a correlation. So in this case, Dr. Jeffries was conducting a correlation. Now, whenever we have correlations, one of the things that I want you to remember is that correlation does not equal causation. Okay, there's 2 reasons why we can't infer causation. All right, so look over here at the sticky note, the second sticky note that I made for you. We have the 2 problems, directionality and third variable. So with directionality, the issue is you really don't know, did variable A cause a change in variable B? Would a variable B cause a change in variable A? Now the third variable problem is that there are countless third variables or other variables that we haven't considered that might be causing a change in both variable A and variable B. So let's go back to this problem right here, this issue between stress and immune function. Okay, what might be some third variables that are out there that could potentially cause a change in both stress and immune function? Well, one thing could just be some kind of sickness. If you are sick, that's probably going to stress you, and it's also going to disrupt your immune function. Other things that students suggested in the last class is maybe you haven't been getting very much sleep, or maybe you have, I don't know, a really poor diet. And either of those things could potentially cause stress and could disrupt your immune function. So when you're thinking of third variables, I want you to think about things that would impact both this variable and that variable, both of them. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay, next question here. For her research project, Maya had participants complete a short IQ test and then asked them to report how many alcoholic beverages they consumed in a week. So she found that those with higher IQs consumed fewer beverages. The first thing you need to do is to identify the variables she was looking at. So if we look at this last sentence, she was really focusing on IQ and number of alcoholic beverages. So those are the two variables. And the next thing you need to do to decide if it's an experiment or a correlation is to think about those variables. Did the experimenter actively manipulate either of those? Okay, well, she can't really actively manipulate IQ. Now, did she actively manipulate how many alcoholic beverages people consumed? No. No, she didn't. She did not randomly assign some people to drink, 25 drinks a week and others to drink 4. She didn't do that. She just observed or recorded information, in which case what we're looking at here is indeed a correlation. Okay, next slide. Now, had we been in class, I would have asked you guys to think about the directionality problem that exists here and a possible third variable problem with interpreting that one thing caused another. Okay, so hopefully you can see that I added a little thing here. This is for the directionality problem. So when we're talking about the directionality problem, we're addressing the fact that we don't really know, did one variable cause the other, or does it go in the opposite direction? We don't know which direction that relationship works. All right, so one way to interpret it, to interpret Maya's finding, is, as she did, that high drinking leads to or causes lower IQ. That's one possible way of looking at it. Another possible way, if we just kind of shift this arrow right here, is it could be possible that those who have lower IQ are going to drink more, meaning lower IQ causes people to drink more. Either of those are potentially correct, but there are also a lot of other interpretations, and that gets us to the third variable. Okay, so now I've added the information for third variable, and again here we're looking for potential variables out there that could cause both high drinking and lower IQ. Okay, so what might be some things that could cause both of these variables? So answers that people have come up with could be maybe parents who have lower education, or another thing kind of along the same lines is maybe you have an alcoholic parent. So if a parent has alcoholic tendencies, probably going to produce children with lower IQ and children who also drink a lot of alcohol. There are other third variables that are out there. Again, remember the key for third variables is it's something that causes a change in both this and this, both of those. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. All right, so now we have another problem right here. And again, you need to identify the variables, as the sticky note points out here. So we're looking this, the very first statement is that George is measuring the effect of distraction on pain perceptions. We need to figure out how did George operationally define distraction. Well, it looks like he defined it in one of two ways. Either were people watching an entertaining movie, or were they being distracted by simple math problems? And then how did he operationally define pain perception? Well, if we go on a little bit further in the problem, we can see that he measured pain perception by how long they could keep their hands in a bath of ice water. Okay, now, did George actively change his variables at all? Did he change pain perception? Well, he kind of did, and he definitely actively changed distraction. He created two groups and assigned people to one of two groups. One of the groups was the entertaining movie, the other group was a simple math problem. All right, so if the answer to that above question about whether or not George actively changed a variable is yes, then what we're looking at is an experiment. So the answer for this one would be experiment. All right, so in that study, you have to kind of remember what the study said, but in the study, what was the independent variable? So what was he actively manipulating? Was he actively manipulating the level of pain that people were experiencing? Was he actively manipulating their gender? Well, no, that wouldn't be possible. Was he actively manipulating the type of activity they were doing? Or was he actively manipulating the coldness of the water? So really what you have to think about is, which of these was he most interested in manipulating? Well, the answer is activity type. He assigned participants to a specific group. Were they in the distraction activity, or were they in the entertaining movie activity? That's what he was actively manipulating. Now, subsequently, level of pain probably changed, but what he was really interested in manipulating was the independent variable, and that was activity type. Okay, now the inevitable other question, what was the dependent variable? So look back over to the sticky note. I've changed it a little bit. The dependent variable is the variable that was changed because of some manipulation to the independent variable. So it's usually easiest if you figure out what was manipulated, if you figure out the independent variable first, and then look at what changed because the independent variable was manipulated. Well, in this case, if you manipulate the activity type, George was predicting that you would have a change in level of pain. So the dependent variable, what was being measured, what was being recorded in his data book, were the participants' levels of pain. Okay, I thought we might get a little bit farther with this first video, but I see we're at about 11 minutes, so I want to go ahead and stop. So the next video in the series will be discussing the challenges that we face when we try to solve problems.